Hello and welcome to Beauty and the Biz, where we talk about the business and marketing side of plastic surgery. I'm your host, Catherine Maley, author of Your Aesthetic Practice, What Your Patients Say, and I'm consultant to plastic surgeons to get them more patients and more profits. Now, today's special guest is Dr. Kian Eftekhari, and he's a board-certified ophthalmologist specializing in ocular, facial, and plastic and reconstructive surgery in private practice within part of a group. So we'll talk more about that. And they've got 3 offices in and around Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, Dr. Eftekhari completed his undergrad studies at Stanford University as well as Oxford University. And then he continued on to the University of Philadelphia, where he not only earned his medical degree, but also completed a residency at the Shea Eye Institute, and then another 2 years of subspecialty training in ocular plastic and facial surgery in Salt Lake City. Now, Dr. Eftekhari is an active member of the American Society of Ophthalmic, Plastic, and Reconstructive Surgery. He's published numerous peer-reviewed articles and speaks nationally as well as internationally on aesthetic eye surgery, as well as some facial trauma. And somehow he still found time to get married and grow his family of 4 children and counting. Welcome to Beauty and the Biz, Dr. Eftekhari.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. I don't know how you find the time to do all this with the kids and the work, and you've got a lot going on there. So tell me, why ocular plastics? Why that specialty?
It's a small specialty. And interestingly, I think one of the reasons I was drawn to it initially was working with a plastic surgeon. So when I was in medical school, I didn't think I was going to be a surgeon. But the minute I set foot in the OR, I was addicted. And it's such a fun environment. And eventually, I gravitated towards plastic surgery because I wanted to be a reconstructive microsurgeon. And I was so lucky when I was at the University of Pennsylvania. I had great mentors. And the chair of the department was a guy named Joe Cerletti, who is an incredible, incredible surgeon and leader. And I remember to this day, I took the SEPTA, which is the Philadelphia train, to this really random part of Philly. Cerletti picks me up in his Jaguar and takes me to do a breast reconstruction case in the community. And he, picked me up in his personal car and drove me there as a medical student. That's unheard of. And kind of from then on, he took me under his wing. And I was so lucky to spend so much time with him. And I remember one day we were in the operating room and he had a fellow he was training, and she was from New Zealand. And they were in the middle of this case where they're doing microsurgery to, basically take tissue from around the abdomen to create new breast tissue for a woman who'd had breast cancer. And he's in the middle of sewing this artery with a tiny suture. And the New Zealand surgeon says that she's going to go back to New Zealand and practice all kinds of different types of plastic surgery, even ptosis surgery. And Cerletti looks up from, he's basically doing the surgery that most people do under a microscope with just loops, which are very about 3 times magnification. And he looks up and he says, ptosis surgery, that's hard. And I'm thinking to myself as a medical student, how could this giant in our field doing this really complex surgery in front of me without a microscope be saying that an eyelid repair is a hard surgery? For whatever reason, that stuck with me. And I kind of went about trying to learn more about eyelid surgery, found great mentors when I was at Penn, and then the rest is history.
Oh, that's amazing. Isn't it fascinating that one little thing that is said or you see can change the trajectory of your life,
Absolutely. And I'm sure he didn't know what
Right.
effect that would have on me. And I truly would have been thrilled to be able to be a reconstructive plastic surgeon. But it just didn't lead me down that path. And I'm really glad with what I chose.
Oh, good. So now you've graduated and you did your fellowship. And then what? How do you enter the marketplace?
Yeah, so when I finished my fellowship in Salt Lake City, I got to train with a guy named Rick Anderson, who was very well known within our field and within other plastic surgery fields for being kind of the guru of eyelid surgery and specific types of eyelid surgery. Unfortunately, rest in peace, Rick passed away just almost a year ago now. And so we're still mourning his loss. But when I finished fellowship, I really wanted to be an academic professor. It was always my goal to do research and really make contributions to the field in terms of what we know about eyelid and orbital surgery. And I worked in an academic department in North Carolina, and it was a great experience for me to just get thrown into the midst of everything there. But really, what I found I enjoyed the most was doing surgery. And it's really hard in an academic setting to do aesthetic surgery, as you probably know. I had patients who were getting charged like a $6,000 facility fee for a surgery that took me 10 minutes. And it was like, all these billing errors and things that you just were out of your control. So eventually I realized I wanted to just take care of patients. And we wanted to move back to Salt Lake City. And Rick actually hung up his boots and retired in 2018. And so a year later, my wife and I moved back here, and I started my practice here in 2019.
So are you from Salt Lake City?
No, I grew up in Houston. Flat concrete jungle, humidity. I couldn't be in a more opposite place with the mountains, the dryness. And it's really just beautiful everywhere you look here in Salt Lake.
I've been there a couple times. It was lovely. Anecdotally, I was there when Krispy Kreme came to town. And in Utah, that was the biggest deal. You would have thought the Pope arrived. Oh my gosh.
People here love sugar. I mean, Easter, Halloween, Valentine's Day, it's like a state holiday here.
Well, Krispy Kreme, you completely stopped traffic, and the police had to direct traffic because it was a drive-through, and everybody was in line getting their donuts. And oh boy, those are sugar. Oh boy. So are you happy with where you ended up in the United States? Are you happy because you got to travel around quite a bit? Are you happy there?
It's the only place I've lived twice, and I like to tell people that because I really feel like I chose it the second time, and we love it here. It's a really great place to live. People are nice. It's a nice patient community. It's a nice place to be a doctor. There's a great medical community here, and it's really growing a lot. And it's been fun, being on the West Coast for a good portion of my life. It's nice to be close to the West Coast, but still be in the mountains.
Yeah. I take it you ski?
We do. Yeah, we all ski.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got that 1-year-old out there on the skis.
We're going to try to get him out soon. Yeah.
So regarding the practice itself, explain how you're kind of in private practice in a group practice.
Yeah. So when I moved back here, I kind of had the decision about opening my own practice, which honestly, coming from a university is an intimidating prospect because you really know nothing about how to financially run a practice. And when I had been here as a fellow, I had gotten to know a group of ear, nose, and throat surgeons that I just became friends with. We did cases together as a fellow and kept in touch. And they have a practice model that basically, just allows other surgeons to join and just share the overhead, but, have some of the administrative help. And it's not easy to set up an aesthetic practice within a group practice, but there are ways to do it. And there are trade-offs to everything you do. I'm kind of an extrovert. I like being around people. So having colleagues around to just discuss things with or talk about business ideas for me is invaluable. Even if you lose a little control over some of the things that are really important that you and I have talked about, like the phone tree and some of the ways that patients can reach you when you're in the context of a group practice. But I think for me, it works really well. It may not work for everybody, but the way we set up the practice is basically that it's a fair way to distribute how we earn things, but also we try to support each other.
They are ENT. Are you the only aesthetic surgeon in the practice?
No, we actually have two facial plastic trained surgeons. One who's been doing structural rhinoplasty for a very long time, has an incredible photo album of great results from rhinoplasty. And he's towards the latter third of his career, I'd say. And then we have another facial plastic surgeon that is started the exact same time as me. And it's really nice because we get along great. He's got a really great business sense. And we're also in different parts of town, which just kind of helps because, we have our own little areas and we don't do the same things. And we sometimes do things together.
And do you, as they say, eat what you kill, or is it, how does all of that work financially?
Yeah. So, just to get into the weeds of it a little bit, basically, there are different ways that you can distribute income in a group practice. And from talking to lots of colleagues around the country, in an eye practice, an ophthalmology practice, there's a ton of equipment that you buy, that they have to buy in order to perform cataract surgery, which is the main income driver for an ophthalmology practice. None of that equipment is used by an oculofacial plastic surgeon. like zero. In fact, my mentor, Rick Anderson, used to say, nobody goes to the eye doctor to get cosmetic surgery. And it's a great quote because it's true. Nobody wants to see that thing that you do, the 1 and 2, when you're checking your vision in the same place where they're discussing facial rejuvenation. It just doesn't jive well. So I thought personally it would be hard to be in an eye practice and do what I want to do. An ENT practice, it's not perfect necessarily, but it's a little different. And the overhead is really just staff, which is the overhead for any surgeon. You got to have staff, phone lines, website, marketing, all those things that are similar to what an oculofacial surgeon would need without all of the extra added cost of the equipment to run an ophthalmology practice. And the way we essentially work it out is that of all the overhead, of all the expenditures we have to make to run the practice, a portion of that is divided equally amongst all of us. And then the other portion of it is divided based on how much you bring in. So if you are a higher earner, or I guess a higher producer is a better way of saying it, then your percentage of overhead will go down. And that is, I think, a very fair way of doing it. So, if, as you know, with aesthetic surgery, a lot of what we do brings in cash into the practice. And that may, pay a lot better than some big 12-hour surgery that is much more complex, to be honest with you. And so if you bring in more, you actually keep more of a percentage of that in the model we've set up.
Gotcha. And then if you were to walk away, are you building equity or are you just building your piece of the pie? And if you walk away, is there an exit strategy for that? Or do you just leave?
Yeah, so there is equity. So in the sense that the docs that started this group were pretty smart about owning their own real estate from pretty early stage. So we own all our own real estate. It's divided equally, which is I think very fair compared to a lot of practices where maybe just the senior partners own the real estate and not anyone else. And then we do have a small surgery center. And I haven't thought a whole lot about walking away because when we moved back here, we just kind of committed to Salt Lake City, and we just want to make things work. My mantra for most things I do on an everyday basis with my staff is, let's make some lemonade today because there's going to be lemons. It just is the way things go, and if you approach it with that attitude, you're going to make the best of it, and you're going to have fun.
What a great attitude. And speaking of staff, do you hire them or does the organization hire them?
The organization is the employer, but I'm very involved in the hiring process. And I think, the hardest thing, if I'm going to give some advice to somebody who would be in my position 5 years ago, if you're coming right out of fellowship and you want to be in a certain town, but you don't want to start your own practice, but let's say there is a group practice that says, hey, we'd love to have you. You can definitely we want you to do rhinoplasties, or we want you to do mommy makeovers, even though we're a reconstructive microsurgery practice. We want you to do that cosmetic stuff. My advice to that surgeon coming out of training would be just make sure that you have a patient coordinator and a marketing budget. If you have those two things, you can make it work. It's not perfect, it's not easy, but neither is solo practice. And so I think those are the real keys, is having that person who's going to be your patient's ally and advocate to help them get their surgery scheduled and be the follow-up person who's going to follow all those leads so you don't lose leads. And then also having a marketing budget, especially when you're starting out, is very important.
A lot of the newbies who come out, they assume that they're going to be handed the patients. And what was your situation? Did they say, yeah, sure, we're going to refer all of our cosmetic to you? Or how did that work? Or did you have to handle this on your own?
It's a combination of a lot. I'm very lucky. The group I'm in, everybody actually is a really nice person. And they did genuinely want me to succeed, both, out of their own kindness, but also not altruistically. If I don't succeed, then I don't pay much overhead. So that's the nice thing about our group, is there's a push and pull to it. But they're willing to send me anything. But, honestly, when an ENT is going through their clinic, they're not thinking about somebody's eyelids or somebody's, facial rejuvenation to send to me. So really, it has to be driven by the person. So if you're coming out of fellowship and you're going to join a practice, you have to assume that you're going to have to take the onus of building the practice upon yourself, unless you're taking over a retiring surgeon's practice, which may honestly not be a great thing either. I think that that was honestly my biggest challenge was I started in 2019 at the end of the year, and my website company, as I've learned through many lessons that I've learned, I keep a book of my lessons and I write them down. And the website company did not deliver on what they said they would deliver upon. And I had a major delay in my website. So my website launched, and I can remember this, February 25th of 2020. If you all remember, there was a certain pandemic that hit when Rudy Gobert from the Utah Jazz got COVID. That was when the whole world shut down on March 11th of 2020. So the timing was very, very unfortunate. And really, I just had to figure out a way to generate some awareness of my practice. And I think that's the hardest thing for somebody who's just arriving in a new city without a lot of connections is to, it's like if a plastic surgeon falls in the forest, does anybody actually hear anything? It's kind of similar. If you drop into town and nobody's heard of you and you don't have a website, how are you going to really create that awareness of what you do and what your expertise is? And that was where I really learned a lot.
And by the way, what is the name? The website name is
eyelidcenterutah.com.
okay, eyelidcenterofutah.com. Is that your URL or is that the group's URL?
It's mine. So I basically, I decided intentionally that I wanted to focus on eyelid surgery because that's the mainstay of what an oculoplastic or oculofacial surgeon does. And our ear, nose, and throat practice just happened to be entcenterofutah.com. So I just said, well, just for ease of, symmetry and alliteration, eyelidcenterutah.com works. And it's kind of nice because it's easy to remember. My name's hard to say. I'll be the first one to say that. And so having drkianeftekhari.com was probably not going to result in a lot of correct spellings. And then it just helps because what I didn't know at the time and that I've learned that's really helpful for young surgeons is Google uses the name of your actual organization with your search with the search algorithm to try to help guide the searcher, the person typing something into Google, on what's going to be the best match. So pretty quickly, even though I didn't have much of an online footprint, just by my company name being Eyelid Center of Utah, eyelid surgery, we ranked fairly highly, kind of got a jump start on others that were, oculo, whatever, reconstructive, whatever. That's not something that a person types into Google. Similarly with facial plastics, I mean, I would say that, people don't necessarily type in preservation rhinoplasty into Google. They type in nose job. And so most people who are really coming right out of fellowship or coming from academics do not realize that. And so I had to take out a crash course on understanding how the world figures out what you do through Google.
And they don't want to dummy it down by calling it a nose job, for example, or you want to call it a bleph, and you have to think who's your audience because it's not other surgeons. So if you want money from the consumer, you have to talk their language. So good tip there.
Yeah, and a marketing company can help you with that. It's not that I did all that myself, but it is important to make that realization, especially because usually a surgeon who's starting out, even if they're starting solo practice, they may choose their name or claim a URL before they even hire a marketing company.
They do it all the
time.
Try to
think intentionally about what your name might be, not so much maybe not your personal name, although a lot of successful surgeons do that, but especially if you're going to sell the practice at some point, it makes sense to have something that makes sense to Google and to the general public.
It's gotten so complicated because social media made it so personal, and the eye center isn't personal. Your name is, but your name is difficult. It took me forever to learn Eftekhari. I still can't spell it. So what do the patients call you? Dr. E or something?
Dr. E is pretty common. A lot of patients here are genuinely curious about where I'm from, and that's refreshing. And they ask me how to pronounce it, and then they say it perfectly.
Where are you?
My family's Iranian. I was born in Houston, and so I'm a Texan. I do wear boots on Fridays, but It's interesting. There's obviously a large LDS population here in Utah, and there was a couple of patients I've met that actually served a mission there back in the 70s before the revolution happened. So there is a genuine curiosity here about the world that is nice, as opposed to sort of a closed-mindedness about people being from other cultures.
I would recommend you on your About Us page is good, but I would have a whole section on that, where you came from and how
It's a
you
good
came
idea.
think the way you are. Patients love. That's why I think social media kicked in. Patients want to know, who are you? Really, who are you? Anyway, it's a thought. Regarding the website, let's just back up for that for a second. Any tips on others choosing a website group? Did you learn any? Can you give us any tips on that? Because that's a big deal. You're creating a website. It's your baby. It's like everything to you. And the website people look at it in a much different perspective. So any tips on how you came to get the vision you wanted on that website?
I think it's a really good question. One tip would be, do not rely on their timelines. If you're planning on opening and paying staff and you're chaining that to when the website company says they're going to be done with your website, I would encourage you to give yourself a buffer. I think that it kind of depends on the stage of practice you're in. So if you've had some people on your program who are incredible surgeons and they don't do a lot of marketing, but that might also be because they're just incredibly good at what they do and they've been in practice for 20 years and have a great name reputation in their community. So for them, their website may not matter at all. So consider what your situation is. If you're already very established and you have a busy practice, why spend the money on doing a whole website rebrand? I think, I read a really great book recently that might be helpful to people called Building Your Story Brand. And basically, the idea behind it is, what story are you trying to tell? Because ultimately, they gravitate to stories. And if you can tell a story about yourself or your typical patient and what they are looking for and what they are trying to get to, then you can more successfully communicate how you can help them. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned, is trying to tell that story. And we actually have a new website coming out, relaunching here in the next couple of weeks.
Nice. Okay, great. By the way, just to shift regarding surgery, is all of your surgery done under general, or are you also doing like IV sedation? Where's your stance on that, on anesthesia?
Yeah. So the nice thing about eyelid surgery is a lot of it can actually be done in the office. There are people who do more office surgery than me. My office surgery setup is not quite set up to do everything I would want to do in the office, but I think that for most things I do, I can do them under IV sedation. I still like to do my brow lifts, or if I'm doing bony fixation or my fat grafting cases, I still like to do those under general, but you don't have to. So I think for the majority of what I do, it's IV sedation, and people like that.
I was going to say, the patients, because I am one, I really like non-general. If I can have something other than that, I haven't had great experiences with general. It just becomes like a big deal.
Yeah,
However, you're working with eyes. You need people to be completely, it's not moving a bit, so I guess you'd have to consider that. But if you can have it done in the office, I think that's terrific.
I think one thing that's an important thing is to talk to your patients about anesthesia for just 2 seconds before you walk out of the room, or have your staff do it, and just ask them, what kind of experiences have you had with anesthesia? If they say they've gotten terribly nauseated, make sure you get them a Zofran beforehand, or even people are using a med because it's fairly cheap if the patient just buys like 2 pills worth. And, I think if you kind of take that conversation head on about what their concerns are with anesthesia, it might be easier to address their fears rather than left unsaid. If they're left unsaid, you don't actually know why they don't want to do a certain type of anesthesia or what their previous experiences have been.
Yeah. Isn't that a good point? Actually ask the patient what their experience has been, and they'll tell you. They're not shy about that. They'll let you know how they feel about all sorts of things if you ask them. Problem is, you don't want to ask because you're afraid to open up a can of worms. But
It takes a little bit of time, but I think it's worth it because it shows them you care, not just about how their surgery goes, but about how they feel after their surgery. Because that's kind of what they're going to remember. It's kind of like the thing about they're only going to see the incisions. They're not going to see all the stuff you did underneath. It's similar with how they feel in those first 12 hours after surgery.
Boy, isn't that the truth? So let's switch over to marketing, and which we're kind of talking about right now. You have a patient base. I would assume you have an older clientele, or what is your patient demographics made up of?
It really varies. I would say 40s, 50s is pretty common. Um, there's a lot of Northern Europeans here who have really heavy eyelids, and even in their 30s and 20s sometimes. But we have a conversation about genetics and that kind of thing. And then certainly there's the population over 60 that may have just retired and decided they want to spend something on making themselves feel better about how their eyes are, or opening their eyes more. And so it's a mixture.
Yeah. So the regarding a cosmetic patient versus a reconstructive patient, I've consulted a lot on this, and I'm always thinking about the patient's experience because a surgeon will come to me and say, "I'd like to cool it on the recon and and increase the cosmetic." And I say, "Well, then let's look at the patient experience. What is it like there?" So, in your practice, have you spent any time looking at the two different kinds of patients? And I hate to say that, but how do you feel about that? The patient experience that has a credit card versus the insurance card. Is there a different experience? Is it all the same? How's it worked out in your practice?
So in my practice, it's all the same. Now, my coordinator will try to be more preemptive if a patient says to my phone person that they're looking to do something that I already know is not going to be reconstructive. Does that make sense? So that's the only difference in terms of the lanes, but we try to create the same experience for everyone. I think what's unique about what oculoplastic surgeons do that may not necessarily be generalizable to other types of plastic surgeons is that um, so much of what we do starts with a droopy upper eyelid. So there was a quote attributed to the person who taught my mentor. So my mentor was Rick Anderson. The person that taught him was a guy named Kroll Beard in San Francisco, your neck of the woods. And Kroll Beard's quote was, "Without ptosis, there would be no oculoplastic surgery." And the idea is that, again, going back to my story about Joe Cerletti, ptosis is not a very fun surgery for most plastic surgeons and even facial plastic surgeons. And so they don't really delve into it and refer it to an oculoplastic surgeon. Many times that is obstructing their vision. And so a lot of my patients start by coming to me saying, "I can't see because my eyelid's droopy. Can you help me?" And they might say, "I really hope insurance will cover this." Okay, well, we can tell you exactly what they will and will not use to determine that. And we can tell you right here in the office if that's even applicable. But if you're going to do that and you're already in the operating room, does anything else bother you want to address? Or we have a questionnaire where we just have people check some boxes about what do they want to learn more about. And so for an oculoplastic surgeon, unlike maybe other types of surgeons you consult with, people often start with that medical problem and then expand outwards. So that's why I think, at least in my practice, everybody gets treated the same and has the same lane.
Okay, and that's worked well. No,
Yeah,
no. Okay.
yeah, I love doing ptosis surgery. It's, I mean, it's not easy always, but it's incredibly satisfying when somebody walks in and their eyes are very naturally open without any use of their forehead. They tell me, "Now I can do Botox again. I couldn't do Botox before because my eyelid was so droopy." And I even get patients who come in and say, "You can actually fix the eyelid to where the eyelashes sit higher." They didn't even know that was a thing. So that's always a fun, moment where I'm like, this is what makes my day, where I can explain to them, yeah, I can. And it's actually one of my favorite surgeries to do.
And you've done a ton of them. I will say, from a patient's perspective, the eyes are the windows to your soul, and you only have two of them. So I would think And you have a beautiful target market of the more mature patient who would care about skill and expertise more than saving a dollar. I would want to go to a specialist. I did, I had a bleph and I went to a specialist, an ocular plastic, facial plastic guy, because it's so serious, it's
Well, I think also, and you allude to this by saying that for a lot of people, especially where I am, so this may not be everywhere, but it's very dry here. We're at altitude. There's a lot of sun. We get a ton of UV radiation. So aging starts around the eyes. And I see people who have beautiful, excellent skin. They've taken great care of themselves, and they have quite a few wrinkles around their eyes or bags under their eyes or a lot of extra skin above their eyelids. And they've never done plastic surgery, and that's kind of where they start because that's where their aging started. So I like what I do because I get to kind of see them at the front end of that journey of, how can I restore my confidence with potentially doing some kind of aesthetic surgery?
for sure. And then we have to talk about social media because that has taken over the world. And I looked at your social. It's very, very good. You just need more of it, but it's lovely. How much time are you spending on that?
It's a great question. It's kind of it's really changed, as you said earlier, how surgeons have to behave. And I think you've said, and other times we've talked about how we kind of have to do everything now to manage the practice, do the surgery, learn the surgeries, take care of our patients, call them back at night, and also do social media and be in charge of marketing totally separate from social media. So it's a lot of hats to wear. I think it's nice to be able to show a different side of yourself, but I like to try to keep it professional and just focus on results and what we do and education. I think, especially the TikTok generation is not necessarily doing eyelid surgery yet because they're a younger demographic. But it's actually kind of shocking and terrifying when you think about that's in for a large portion of the population, that's how they get their news and their medical knowledge. And so I think in some ways we owe it to our patients and to the public to try to educate through the channels that people are looking at. They might have been flipping through the pages of Allure or Vogue or In Style 30 years ago, but not very many people are looking at print media, to learn about plastic surgery. At least I don't think so. And so where they're looking for these things is on social media. So we have to transition to trying to educate them about, what's a good result and what's an appropriate procedure and what's not. And I have patients who bring in photos to show me before surgery to say, this is what I want. And sometimes I really have to sit down and say, we might not really be on the same page here about what this outcome is, because that person, I can almost guarantee you can't close their eyes.
So true. And we've all seen that on the internet. The Asian eyes, and they were way too extreme.
Right.
We've all seen that. Is that a big part of your, because if you're doing eyes, you probably specialize in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Is Asian eye a big deal for your practice?
It is. Yeah, there's a large Asian population here, and I enjoy doing it and have built that up as part of my practice. I think it's just because of our proximity to California, and historically, there's been an Asian population here in Utah for many hundreds of years, actually.
Huh, that's great. Tell us a crazy patient or staff story.
Um, I have to go back to my fellowship for this one. I had a patient during fellowship who had a bleph, and the patient was a healthcare worker. I'll just say that wasn't a physician, but a different kind of healthcare worker. And surgery went great. Sent her home. Came back for her post-op visit, and for whatever reason, my mentor would always see patients around 2 or 3 days after surgery. And in this case, it was lucky because she'd taken out all her stitches, and her wound was completely dehisced. And so, question is, were you rubbing your eyes? What happened? Did you, accidentally wash your face and then rub too hard with a towel? No, no, I just thought that you guys didn't do a very good job. Did he do it? And she points to me because I'm the trainee. And actually, I in that case. And so my mentor, Rick, is just kind of befuddled and said, well, no, we need to suture this up again. And so we take her to the procedure room, we suture her up again, and we put in permanent sutures. So they're black and they're silk and you can see them. So don't take these out, please. And She, sure enough, shows up 4 or 5 days later and says, well, I don't really think you guys did a very good job. So I took him out myself and had to hyst again. So we actually had to suture her 3 times. And that was one of my first insights into taking care of healthcare workers. You have to be have a little bit of a different approach sometimes, and look out for some of these things where they may think they're in the know about what an actual good outcome of a procedure is, but they don't, because what they actually do in healthcare is a very different field or specialty. This was somebody who did procedures. So,
That's insane. Did she end up getting a good result? Because her scar must be tough.
it's a good question. She did have a little bit of a scar, but given how there's a lot of people here with what we call crepey eyelid skin, where it's very, very thin, they tend to recur and need maybe more than one bleph over 20 years because that skin is just paper thin. And she was lucky; she had paper thin skin, and that tends to heal a little bit better without a scar. Downside to that, they kind of can recur in terms of the skin bunching up.
Dear
So
Lord.
she did okay,
All
but
right. So, give me a big challenge that you've had growing your practice or personally that you've learned a lot from.
I think the biggest thing for me was, when you're in a university, you feel like you're just like the expert, whether you are or not. And then coming to a community where there's already quite a few well-established surgeons, and you have no brand awareness, and walking into the office and not really having a practice because COVID and everything else, and I walked into something that I started myself. That was definitely the most humbling thing for me, was just having to build from nothing. The trade-off to that, though, is that I remember back in those days, every patient felt like a gift, and it was really a gift to be able to take care of them. And as I look back, it's kind of like you build the house brick by brick, and each one of those bricks meant something at the time. And now look at that house you've built, and that's been really, you know, the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, I think.
For sure. And you should be very proud of that. And then lastly, tell us something we don't know about you. And I hope it's about your family. You have 4 children, and I know one of them is under 1. So, how the heck? And can you talk about your wife as well?
Yeah, my wife she works more than I do. She's incredible. She's a radiation oncology physician at the cancer center, and she wears a lot of different hats between leadership and research and everything she does, and being able to be a mom to our 4 kids. We split a lot of those responsibilities, but it can be pretty busy. We don't have any family nearby. I'll tell you one thing you don't know about me, which means a lot to me, is my mom was a physician. She passed away during the pandemic of a kind of an unrelated condition, but it made it really hard to visit her when she was sick and on hospice. But my mom worked pretty much until the day she was on hospice. She was one of the most dedicated physicians I know. And she was an endocrinologist who specialized in infertility before really IVF was a thing. So she had an album of babies that she had helped families have, that she kept with her, and next to all her valuables, because that was really what she had put into the world, was this group of children that she'd helped families who really struggled with infertility have. And I just remember, she would make telephone calls at night to people to check in on them and say, this is how we're going to plan this out to try to help you have a baby. And it just makes me realize that being a doctor is really a gift. I mean, whether you're giving somebody a baby or whether you're giving somebody a renewed sense of confidence with aesthetic surgery or reconstructive surgery, really what we do, we're very lucky to be able to do it. And there's a ton of challenges, don't get me wrong, but it just keeps me grounded and makes me remember that that's really a gift that not a lot of people in finance or in tech have, that gift to be able to give to people.
Ah, that's a great story. Wow. I mean, congratulations on having a mom like that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
she was an impressive lady.
no, it's
She kind of,
fine.
she was been in England for most of her early life. So she was very stern, but she was very, very dedicated to her patients. And that was really passed down to me.
Oh, that's so great. So, if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do so? I know your website is eyelidcenterutah.com and your Instagram is Dr. Kian E. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you can reach me in my email, Dr. E, D-R-E, or Dre if you're from the early 90s, at eyelidcenterutah.com. And you can send me a direct message on Instagram. I'll respond to that right away. And yeah, it's really a pleasure to be able to talk to you. And thank you for having me on the program.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited to watch your career grow. You're off to a really good start. You've got a great following. Your patients love you. Your reviews are amazing. I really like your Instagram a lot. It's not flashy, it's educational, like you said. I love that you're doing FAQs, and they're real FAQs, the ones that patients would ask, and they're short, sweet. That's how you educate a patient in today's world, I think, short quips that are educational, and they say, I didn't know that,
I think if you're struggling to figure out your voice on social media, it's always okay to start with your expertise because I put 14 years in, this is beyond from college to, getting to where I am as far as learning these things. And lots of surgeons put in more time than that. And, we have a lot of expertise. Offer that as education to your patients. You'd be surprised by what they don't realize.
Yep. And even when you think the patient already knows this, they never heard it from you. So please don't hold back. And with that, I'm going to thank you, Dr. E. Thanks for being here. And everybody, we're going to wrap it up now. If you feel so inclined, please give me a good review at Beauty in the Biz. Subscribe, and of course, pass this around to your colleagues and your staff so they also can learn what's happening out in the world. And then if you need anything from me at all, I do offer a strategy call, and you can just check that out at catherinemaley.com. Thanks so much, and we'll talk again soon.
The fastest way to success is to model other successful surgeons who have what you want, but you can only see their results, not the path they took to get there. So you continue to jump from one thing to another, hoping to find something that will work for you too. But it rarely does. So try this shortcut instead. It's guaranteed to move you forward. I compiled my intellectual property to grow cosmetic revenues, everything I've gleaned over the years, into one playbook of the most successful practices and what they do to win. Go to cosmeticpracticevault.com and let's grow your cosmetic revenues.